Hello again and welcome back. In this video, we'll be looking at conditional sentences. What is a conditional sentence? It's an if-then sentence. This is a sentence that states that something will happen if some condition is fulfilled. There are two parts of a conditional sentence. The first is the protasis, and this is the condition, the if part. The protasis states the condition that must be true in order for the result to follow, and that result is called the apodosis. Usually the protasis and apodosis are each a full complete clause. So in English, a protasis might be if I run out of milk, or if I had been there, or if she says yes. And the apodosis that follows, well, if I run out of milk, the apodosis would be then I will go to the store. Protasis, if I had been there. Apodosis, then I could have helped. Protasis, if she says yes. Apodosis, then we will get married. There are four kinds of conditional sentences in Greek. These are classified based on the word introducing the protasis. In other words, which kind of if is used. Secondly, the tense and mood of the verb in the protasis. And finally, the tense of the verb in the apodosis. And each of these classifications has a slightly different significance. The fourth kind never fully appears in the New Testament, so we're going to focus on the first three classes. The first class conditional sentence is classified based on the introduction of the protasis with a. This is one of our two words for if, a. And notice it looks just like the third person singular of Amy, so don't get it confused. A here in a first class conditional sentence is followed by an indicative verb in any tense. This is what we call a condition of fact. The protasis, the condition, is treated as true. Now, this may only be from the speaker or writer's perspective, and this may only be for the sake of argument. So it's a condition that's not really hypothetical. At least, it's not being treated as hypothetical. In English, an example would be to say, if my mother loves me, she won't forget my birthday. It's not really in question whether my mother loves me. I'm assuming she does, but I'm stating that if that condition is fulfilled, and it is, then she won't forget my birthday. Another example would be this. Since I have to pay my taxes, I won't be buying that new TV. Notice that I don't have to translate a first-class conditional sentence using if. I can also use since or because, given that the apodosis is assumed to be true. Since I have to pay my taxes, that's a condition that I'm assuming is actually the case, then the result is I won't be buying that new TV. Here's a Greek example from Matthew 12:28. E de en pneumati theou ego ekbalo ta diamonia, ara efthasin ephumas he basileia tu theou. A, if I am casting out demons, ekbalo ta diamonia, by the Spirit of God. Now notice we used a, and ekbalo is just a regular indicative verb, present tense here. Then the kingdom of God has come to you. Ara efthasin ephumas he basileia tu theou. And efthasin is a form of epitithemi, but it's a regular first aorist. With a second-class conditional sentence, we also introduce the protasis with a, and we also have the verb in the protasis in the indicative mood. But for a second-class conditional sentence, we specifically have the protasis verb in a past tense, either imperfect or aorist. Also, in the apodosis of a second-class conditional sentence, in the result clause, we usually see the particle on. and we have an indicative verb that's in the same past tense as the verb in the protasis. This is what we call a contrary to fact condition, where before the protasis was treated as true, at least for the moment. With a second-class conditional sentence, the protasis is treated as untrue. And the result, of course, is that the apodosis, the result clause, is also false. This is a purely hypothetical condition, and an English example where if I were an alien, then my kids would be too. But of course, given that I'm not an alien, my kids are also human beings. A Greek example of a contrary to fact condition would be this: E gar egnosan, uk an ton kurion tes doxes estaurosan. This is from 1 Corinthians 2:8. Because if they had known, e egnosan, and notice we have a and then an indicative verb, egnosan, in a past tense, the aorist. E gar egnosan, if they had known, uk an, there's our an, uk an ton kurion tes doxes estaurosan. They would not have crucified the Lord of glory. And crucified, estaurosan, is in the same past tense, aorist, as egnosan, the verb in our protasis. Finally, the third-class conditional sentence uses a different word for if. It uses eon to introduce the protasis. It also uses a different mood in the protasis, the subjunctive mood. In the apodosis, though, you can have any mood or tense for the verb. It's really quite open. A third-class conditional sentence is a possible condition. The protasis is treated as possible but uncertain. It's less hypothetical than a second-class condition, but less certain than a first-class condition. In English, an example would be, if the sky is clear, then it isn't raining. The sky might be clear, or it might be overcast. I'm not sure. But if the sky is clear, then the result will be that it isn't raining. Or, if I stay up too late, I'll be tired in the morning. I haven't yet decided whether I'm going to stay up late or not, but if I do, the consequence will be that I'll be tired in the morning. A Greek example of this third-class, future more probable conditional would be kai eon apolusso autus nestes es oikon auton ekluthesontai en tehado. That's from Mark 8:3. Kai and eon apolusso, if I let them go, if I release them, autus, nestes, hungry, es oikon auton, if I let them go to their homes hungry, ekluthesontai, they will perish, en tehado, on the way. So I have there eon apolusso, although apolusso looks like it might be a present tense or an indicative verb. Notice that we have the sigma tense marker, but we have the long omega ending. So that shows us that we're dealing with an aorist and it's subjunctive. So eon apolusso, eon with the subjunctive, and then ekluthesontai, a future passive verb in the apodosis. The assumption here is that it's possible that Jesus will let them go to their homes hungry, but it's not definite that he will. If, though, he does let them go, the result will be that they perish on the way. A third-class present general condition might be something like this. Kai eon krino de ego he krisis he eme aleithine estin. That's from John 8:16. Unlike the previous third-class conditional we looked at, the present general condition is a condition that is ongoing as a general reality. So eon krino, if I judge, and there's no particular act of judgment in view, as there was in the last example. It's just if it happens at any point that I judge, then the result will be that my judgment is true. But we still have here a third-class condition. Eon plus the subjunctive krino, and in the apodosis, it doesn't really matter what tense or mood we have, but here we have a present tense verb. If I judge, my judgment is true. So here's a summary of our conditional sentences. A first-class condition is one where the protasis uses a plus an indicative verb, and the apodosis has the verb in any mood and any tense. And the meaning is that the apodosis is true. The condition is true, at least for the sake of argument. We would negate a first-class condition with u. A second-class condition uses a still, but now the indicative verb is always in a past tense, and in the apodosis we have the particle on, and the verb is in the same past tense as in the protasis. Now the apodosis is assumed to be false, at least for the sake of argument, but it's negated, unlike the first-class condition, with may. Finally, the third-class condition uses eon plus the subjunctive verb in the protasis in the condition, and in the apodosis, in the result clause, we have any verb in any mood or tense. And the apodosis is a genuine possibility, but may not be certain. We may have a specific future event in mind, as in our first example, or we may be describing a general cause and effect pattern, as in our second example. In both cases, we would negate a third-class condition with may. Now, there are a couple of tricks to watch with conditional sentences, and most of them have to do with first-class conditions and the assumption that the apodosis is true. We have to realize that just because the apodosis is being presented as if it were true doesn't mean that first-class conditions are always actually true. The speaker may just be assuming its truth temporarily for the sake of argument or for effect. Like in 1 Corinthians 15:13, when Paul says, "E de anastasis nekron uk estin, ou de Christos egegertai." But if there is no resurrection from the dead, anastasis nekron uk estin, notice we have a with a present tense indicative verb, so this is a first-class condition. Ou de Christos egegertai, then neither has Christ been raised. Well, of course, even though this is a first-class condition, Paul does think that Christ was raised, and he does think that there was a resurrection from the dead. But for the sake of argument, he's treating it as possible, even as definite for a moment, that there isn't a resurrection from the dead. Why? Because that's what his audience thinks. So he's saying, all right, if I grant for the moment that there's no resurrection from the dead, what would the outcome be? Well, then there would be the reality that Christ could not be raised either. And so just because we have a first-class condition doesn't mean that in reality the apodosis is actually true. It just means that the apodosis is being treated as true, being treated as something that you can take for granted, at least for argument's sake, and at least for the moment. You can learn more about conditional sentences in Mounce's Basics of Biblical Greek, 3rd edition, and I've given you this section and page numbers there, and also in Wallace's Basics of New Testament Syntax, and I've given you the 1st edition page numbers for his Conditional Sentences chapter.